McGraw-Hill Audio presents More Than a Pink Cadillac. Mary Kay Incorporated's 9 Leadership Keys to Success by Jim Underwood. Preface by Richard C. Bartlett, Vice Chairman, Mary Kay Incorporated. Read by Kimberly Schraf. Preface. For nearly 3 decades, my answer to the question, "How are you?" has never been anything but great. I must admit that as I close in on my 70th birthday, feeling physically great is not always possible. But when I answer that question with great, I'm referring not to my physical state, but to my emotional state. Everyone at Mary Kay Incorporated responds the same way to that question. Why? Because we all learned from Mary Kay Ash herself that there is no other acceptable answer. If you're ever in the vicinity of our world headquarters in Dallas, test us. Stop any employee and ask her how she is. I guarantee it, she'll be great. Our leaders in particular take this lesson to heart. Occasionally, people from outside our organization, and sometimes even new employees, challenge this response as insincere, even phony. But these cynics miss the essential point of what we take to be leadership. Emotional leadership is fundamental to leadership success. Leaders influence the emotional mindset of every individual within an organization. Speaking for myself, I am mindful that great cannot be insincere if it's going to work the way Mary Kay intended it to work. It must be values-driven, part of the ingrained culture of an organization. Thanks to Mary Kay, we have a purpose, and each of us believes he or she has a special duty to perform. We have elected to serve others and find great satisfaction in the giving. Mary Kay called it our go-give spirit. Our purpose or mission is to enrich women's lives. Obviously, you can't do this unless your mindset is based on seeing the glass as half full. But as Jim Underwood explains in the following pages, we believe that you also can't fulfill the Mary Kay mission unless you follow the golden rule. As to the Pink Cadillac in this book's title, yes, that's the best-known image of our company, and probably one of the most recognizable symbols in the history of marketing. And yes, it's a form of recognition for an individual who has done an outstanding job of distributing our products, which happen to be cosmetics. But this trophy on wheels is a symbol of something far greater. It is a symbol of a whole way of doing business, which we call the Mary Kay way. This book provides insights into a unique and phenomenally successful business. It is a business that grew out of, and is still founded on, a simple set of powerful principles. But let me start at the beginning. Mary Kay Ash, our founder, had few advantages when she was young. But one that she did have was her mother's constant encouragement. "You can do it," the mother told the daughter, and the lesson stuck. It was sorely tested when Mary Kay started her career in direct sales as a Stanley home parties dealer just after World War II. She learned very quickly that she could not stand up at a Stanley party and explain to her hostess and guests that because she wasn't feeling well that evening, they would have to excuse her substandard demonstration. As Mary Kay liked to say, "That dog won't hunt." She knew she had to be great, or most likely there would be no sales and no profits, and her young family might go hungry. After setting up her own company, she learned another lesson about the positive power of great. When those around her became more positive because of her attitude, they became more enthusiastic, and performance soared. She often said, "Act enthusiastic, and you'll be enthusiastic." She added, "Nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm." Mary Kay knew that in each human being there is a purpose. In her words, God didn't have time to make a nobody, only a somebody. Many people outside our organization might consider these phrases trite, but they were one important way Mary Kay influenced other people's emotions and exerted her leadership. Management scholar John Cotter writes that leadership consists of creating a vision, aligning others to that vision, and then inspiring them to achieve the vision. In my opinion, no one in American business has done that better than Mary Kay Ash. Mary Kay knew her purpose in life. She also knew somehow that her purpose was larger than her own life. When Morley Safer of TV's 60 Minutes news magazine suggested that she was using God to further her own ambition, Mary Kay responded without hesitation that he had it backward. She sincerely believed that God was using her to accomplish his purposes. She was confident that there was a grand pattern to her life. In the 30 years I knew her, I never saw her waver from her purpose, not once. I invite you to think how many people you've met about whom you'd say the same thing. Mary Kay viewed her company as a family, a living community that she strove to perpetuate. She talked of P&L not as profit and loss, but as people and love. She knew that maximizing profits could not serve as the driving purpose of a company that hoped to sustain itself over decades. Make no mistake, Mary Kay knew profits were important, but they were only a means to an end. They would finance the next round of investments and make possible the next installment in a saga of enriching women's lives. She knew she had to be generous, investing in her employees and the members of her independent sales force. And she had to build binding ties of trust and loyalty, starting within the corporate family and extending all the way to her tens of millions of customers. A few years ago, at the annual World Economic Forum, WEF, at Davos, Switzerland, I got into a public debate with Michael Hammer, who had just published his book Re-Engineering the Corporation, which was beginning to make waves in corporate America. I disagreed with Hammer on some key philosophical points having to do with re-engineering, the central prescription of which seemed to boil down to the far less attractive process of downsizing. Since then, despite setbacks to the larger field of re-engineering, downsizing is still rampant among U.S. corporations. Mass layoffs continued at a record high in the early years of the 21st century, with an average of almost 2 million workers expelled from their jobs annually. Since that time, downsizing seems to be corporate America's favored approach to increasing productivity and profits, enhancing shareholder value, and dominating global competition. Of the world's top 1,000 corporate leaders attending that WEF meeting, I'd guess a majority shared this view of corporate responsibility and leadership. In fact, in my 40 years of executive experience, which has included much contact with fellow business leaders, one version or another of this approach, vision and strategy couched in warlike, almost inhuman terms, has been the rule rather than the exception. What's interesting and troubling about this is that employees in organizations view leadership in entirely different terms. They want their leaders to have high integrity, show respect, be honest, be fair, and even be compassionate. Shouldn't we listen to them if we want their best? I try to conduct myself as a servant leader, and I suggest that the most effective leaders in history have had the same mindset. I really believe corporations can be major instruments of social change, as Mary Kay has been in empowering women. They also can serve a higher purpose, as in advancing women's health, funding cancer research, eliminating violence against women, and preserving the environment. I believe the success of future corporate leaders will be measured not by gargantuan profits, obscene executive stock options, and simple shareholder wealth creation, but by contributions to sustainable communities, ecosystems, and economies, and above all, as custodians of the human spirit. These elements should define and drive a leader's purpose. Mary Kay got at her purpose in many ways, both large and small. I distinctly recall our internal telephone directory when I joined the company in 1973. It was in alphabetical order by first name. She knew the value of operating like a small company, really more like an extended family. That practice still lives today. Top executives of this company, whose independent sales force numbers more than 900,000, still take the time to call each person who has a family tragedy, a health problem, an accident, or a death, to let each one know that we care as an extended family about her or him as an individual. We also remember birthdays and the Christmas holiday with a personal card, not to mention letters praising career accomplishments. It's vital to us to maintain the connectedness of a small, tightly knit family, even though we have become a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. When I was president of Mary Kay Incorporated, I insisted on taking every call that came to my office from the field sales organization. Thanks to our excellent customer service training, the vast majority of such calls that might have ended up in my office were answered satisfactorily before they reached me. But the offer stood. You probably can guess that as a hands-on leader, only steps down the hall from Mary Kay Ash, I liked being in touch with our customers. Truth be told, when our customer service improved to the extent that I started feeling out of things, I found a new way to stay personally connected. I would often slip down to the Director Information Services telephone bank, pop on a headset, and answer calls for a while. It wouldn't take me long to get a feel for the attitude of the field or to figure out where our next business challenge might be coming from. I learned to listen carefully from Mary Kay. She believed that being a good listener is vital to being a good leader, and she made all of us around her believe that as well. But there was something more her leadership style required of me: to think like a woman. Mary Kay reminded me on more than one occasion that I was thinking like a man on some issue. That mindset simply won't cut it in a company with an independent sales force of nearly 1 million women. And so I and other males learned what, for lack of a better term, might be called empathetic thinking. And we are better leaders for it. Earlier, I noted that Mary Kay Ash had a sense of destiny. She also had a keen sense of her own mortality. In the early 1970s, she personally took on the challenge, through books, speeches, videos, meetings, and other media, of making sure that her life's mission would carry on after her. She also knew she would need people who understood how to perpetuate her beliefs. As Jim Underwood explains, she focused on what she called her national sales directors, the top rank of the independent sales organization. She entrusted those leaders with her purpose, insisting over and over that they had to be prepared to carry on our mission when she no longer could. The Nationals, as we affectionately call them, did take up her purpose when Mary Kay became ill and after her death on November 22, 2001. Few leaders have surrounded themselves with such an all-encompassing succession plan, and few have executed it so masterfully. Although she frequently operated in the realm of the visionary, Mary Kay also understood that we had to implement on a day-to-day level in order to perform our jobs excellently. When she hired her first employees, she developed a small pink card that spelled out our service promise to our customers in fine detail. 40 years later, we still provide this card to new employees. Because of our relationships with our sales organization and theirs with their customers, we have to be a zero-tolerance company in terms of implementation errors. Back orders are costly, of course, but we think of them in more human terms. They cause pain for both the salesperson and her customer. Shoddy or impolite service will cause the immediate and direct loss of a customer. But more than that, the customer will link any ill will to the person she bought the product from, as well as the company whose name is on the package. We invest heavily in training and in state-of-the-art customer service contact programs, such as our Preferred Customer Program and Internet programs, to ensure that our customers are surrounded by service. Yet we realize that we can never do enough. Jim Underwood quotes one of our favorite Mary Kay sayings, "Never rest on your laurels. Nothing wilts faster than a laurel sat upon." The company is investing tens of millions more dollars in a new supply chain management system that will alter every employee's job within a year or two. When that program is complete, there will be another system improvement, and then another. When it comes to providing better customer service, change is constant. The secret to coping with change in an environment like ours is to rely on what doesn't change, the values that drive our organization. Jim Underwood has appropriately made those values the centerpiece of his book, and we thank him for that. Mary Kay Incorporated is composed of ethical leaders whose purpose does not waver. When we change, we do so because we think we have found a better way to accomplish our purpose. Our assumption is that if we change without reference to our purpose, we will get into trouble, and if we do that often enough, we will fail. But we won't fail, because we've been taught by the Master. We know our purpose. It's enriching women's lives. Dick Bartlett, Vice Chairman, Mary Kay Incorporated, August 2002. Section 1. The foundation of success. Principle-based leadership. Mary Kay was a devout Christian. She would discuss her beliefs freely, yet she often said that what you did was a lot more important than what you said. In developing the idea of her new company, she knew that if a company was to be really successful, it had to be founded on unchangeable principles and practices. That is, there had to be a set of principles, ideas that defined acceptable behaviors for a company that was determined to achieve excellence. At the heart of Mary Kay's founding principles was her belief in the golden rule as a way to conduct business. Mary Kay believed that if she treated others, employees, vendors, and customers, as she herself wanted to be treated, her company would thrive. It was this simple yet powerful principle that drove everything Mary Kay did and everything she taught people to do. At the beginning, Mary Kay decided that the company would apply the golden rule to every business problem, even legal matters. This was unorthodox, to say the least. Most executives involved in corporate legal battles go on the offensive, taking an aggressive approach regardless of who is right or wrong. Not Mary Kay. And in those early days, one new employee, an attorney, found out just how serious Mary Kay was in applying the golden rule to her business. Brad Glendenning, today the company's executive vice president, general counsel, and corporate secretary, wasn't just another attorney looking for a job. He was a trial lawyer, and a very good one at that. Trial lawyers, for those unfamiliar with the breed, are a species unto themselves. They could have coined the phrase, "take no prisoners." Glendenning had seen numerous confrontations in court, where his cohorts in the legal profession didn't hesitate to launch an all-out assault on the victim. Regardless of the circumstances, the trial lawyer's job is to discredit the opposition, explains Glendenning. It doesn't matter if it's a little old lady who was hit by a drunk driver. The typical trial lawyer is going to try to create doubt about the little old lady and her behavior in order to win the lawsuit. Glendenning came to Dallas in 1980 to interview for a position as a trial lawyer at one of the top law firms in the country. Along the way, however, he also got an overture from another Dallas company, Mary Kay Cosmetics. One thing led to another, and the trial lawyer ultimately became convinced that the job at Mary Kay was the one he should take. When an offer came, he accepted, and his first assignment after being hired was to go to meet the firm's founder, Mary Kay Ash. I look back on that day and shudder to think about what might have happened to my chances at that meeting, recalls Glendenning. Here I walk into this meeting with my brazen attitude, a giant frizzy haircut, and my nonconformist earth shoes on. I must have looked more like a sideshow barker than a professional, but that's the way trial lawyers dressed and behaved. I really did not look like someone who would fit into a first-class organization. The meeting with Mary Kay went well, Glendenning recalls. His new employer did not seem to pay much attention to his appearance, evidently focusing instead on who he was as a person. She was gracious and seemed honestly interested in him as an individual. Toward the end of the meeting, she looked over at Virgil Pulliam, the corporate attorney who had hired Brad, and asked Pulliam if he had explained the firm's legal policy to the new hire. Pulliam affirmed that he had, but Mary Kay apparently decided to make sure that Glendenning understood how the firm ran its legal affairs. She looked Glendenning in the eye and said, "We do what's right. Try to never forget that." That statement would have a significant impact on the rest of Brad Glendenning's life. At first, he did not understand the implications of what Mary Kay had said. Once he really grasped what she meant, it took him a while to believe that a company could succeed in business doing that. What she meant, simply stated, was that the company would not engage in some of the practices that had permeated the legal profession. Rather than attacking and destroying the credibility of a victim, for example, The corporate policy at Mary Kay was to make sure that the firm accepted responsibility for a wrong and worked to correct the situation. It was a total reversal for me and contradicted everything I'd been taught in law school, Glendenning explains. What I discovered was that this was not only policy, it was expected behavior. You didn't approach people as adversaries if you had made a mistake. If we did make a mistake, we went the extra mile to make sure that our error resulted in the fair and equitable treatment of the wronged party. It was not an issue of creating a legal defense. It was an issue of making sure we did the right thing. When everyone wins. Almost every person who worked directly with Mary Kay has a story like Brad Glendenning's to tell about her uncanny ability to define the moment, to stand up for what she believed, and to promote the golden rule. It is nearly impossible to spend any time at Mary Kay Incorporated without hearing a reference to one or more of her sayings.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?